Hello everybody! Welcome to another DNA review video where I review your DNA and genealogy questions. If you want your questions answered, be sure to go to my subreddit to post your questions and I will eventually answer them in one of these videos. I'm also looking for people to post memes and other funny stuff related to genealogy and DNA, so if you've got that, post that too. But let's jump into it. Okay, so for this question, we have results from 23andMe and Ancestry DNA. And it looks like this person has a lot of mixture in there, and I can already see that for DNA communities, we have Puerto Rican, Afro-Jamaican, and then for 23andMe, we also see Panama, Honduras, we see again Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and then their question is, how true is the Puerto Rico? They have matches as high as 392 centimorgans on 23andMe and 413 centimorgans on Ancestry who are Puerto Rican. They have no known connection to these people, and it seems that these two persons are related to each other, but not to her paternal grandmother's DNA, nor to any cousins from both the paternal and maternal lines. They say the paternal grandmother was born in El Salvador. The paternal grandfather seems to be a non-paternity event, an NPE. Although I'm a bit confused about the statement here because it seems to be them talking both about the paternal grandfather, the biological one, as well as the adoptive paternal grandfather. But then they mention, and I recently found about him, his grandma was Jamaican. So I don't know, are they referring to the biological grandfather or the grandfather that they grew up with? It's a little confusing. But then they also say maternal grandmother was born in Panama and her grandma was from Peru, and then her grandfather was Italian, Spaniard great-grandparents, and then the maternal grandfather also born in Panama, and his mother was half Greek, half African, and it's unknown where the rest of her family is from. So basically, we're looking at a whole lot of different NPE events throughout the family tree. Now, when we look at the results, we see such huge mixes, but they all make sense with everything she knows already. But the main question is, how true is that Puerto Rican? And I would say it's probably very likely. Because Puerto Ricans are so mixed, it's going to be hard to look at just the admixture and say, oh yeah, that's Puerto Rican. What you need to look at are your matches. And you've already done that. And two of your top matches are from Puerto Rico. So going back, we have the 392 centimorgans on 23andMe and 413 centimorgans on Ancestry. So let's jump over to the DNA Painter Shared Centimorgan Project table. So here we have the table. We're going to go put in those centimorgan numbers. So we have 392. And we're looking at, with a high chance of it being somewhere like a half first cousin once removed, and then we have a lot of these half great aunt, half great uncle sort of thing. So basically, a great aunt or uncle would be your grandparent's sibling. So a half would be your grandparent's half sibling. So if they're the age of your grandparents, they might actually be a half sibling to one of your grandparents. We're also looking at possible great aunt or uncle. So if they are of the older age, then they may be a great aunt or uncle, which would basically be a sibling to your great grandparent. Of course, if they're of a younger age, they could be a half great niece or nephew, or great niece or nephew, which basically that means that you have a sibling or a half sibling who either has grandkids or great grandkids. So based on your age, that might be not possible. So there are a few that you can rule out here. Then we're also seeing that there is a chance that you could be a half great niece or nephew, or a half great aunt or uncle, depending on ages, as well. That could be a second cousin, a half first cousin once removed, or first cousin twice removed. Now 413 is going to be pretty much similar. I'm just going to put it in just so you can see, but it's pretty much the same thing, just slight change in the percentage, but those are so close. But you mention that they are related to each other. So the question becomes, do you know how they're related to each other? I assume that you do because one's on 23andMe and one's on Ancestry, so you're obviously not matching them both on the same system. So I assume that their trees made it so that you know how they're related. So you know the family that they should be connecting to. So what you can do is build out that family tree and look for other matches who are from that tree. Then you can build the what are the odds tree as well. So that's the Watto tool, which I discussed in a previous video. Now they do mention they tried DNA Painter's tool, so I'm guessing Watto was probably one of them. It is a bit more difficult of a tool, but if you can learn it, it can be extremely helpful in situations like this. Now, having worked on multiple different DNA results connected to Puerto Rico and having researched Puerto Rican families, I can tell you that it is a very difficult process. For one, Puerto Ricans do deal with endogamy. So when you're talking about an island, usually it's a lot fewer people that you can, find wives with. So you often find a lot of people will be related in multiple ways, and that's endogamy. A group of people marrying only other people within a certain group of people for multiple generations, often many generations. So if the ancestry you have connected to Puerto Rico traces pretty far back in Puerto Rico, it's making a whole lot of sense, and even more, that endogamy may be making these matches of 392 and 413 a little bit higher than what you would typically expect. And one thing that endogamy makes very difficult, DNA Painter tools, such as what are the odds, the shared centimorgan tool, all of those things are based off of non-endogamous population. So those estimated relations that we were talking about before, it might actually be a bit further. But one other thing that you can do to try to figure this out is use the X chromosome, as well as using mitochondrial DNA and Y DNA. Now, this will also all depend on how you think you're connected and what matches and people are available to test. But if you do have a significant amount on your X chromosome, then you're going to be related only through ways that you can inherit the X chromosome. And then if you can do Y DNA testing, so if one of these matches is male and you think it might be through a paternal line of yours, so like you mentioned, your paternal grandfather is a mystery. So do you have a brother, or is your dad willing to take a Y DNA test? Because that could help figure it out, because maybe it's through that side. And if one of these is like a purely paternal cousin, basically, let's say it's your paternal grandfather's father and he had a brother and that's who these people are descending from, and was the brother's son, well, then your dad or your brother should match them on the Y chromosome, and that could help. At the same time, if you do a mitochondrial DNA test, which you'd need to do through family tree DNA to get the matches, that could maybe help figure it out if it's through your purely maternal line. So there are a few other options that you can take. So here we have, why do I have so much from England and Northwestern Europe? 22% context in the comments. So the comment says, dad is from El Salvador. You can see his DNA results compared to mine in the last image. So we've got multiple images. The left column is me, the right column is him. Okay, so yeah. So the left column is our poster, the right column is his father. Then he says his dad has little, if any, ancestry from England and Northern Europe. So he thinks that the England and Northern Europe would have to come from his mother's side of the family. Mother hasn't done a DNA test, but he's found that they're from Austria and Germany, mostly from the beginning of the end of the 19th century. And then they mention an ancestor of a great-grandparent and a great-great-grandparent on the mother's side having German last names, and they do know where they come from, but they didn't say where, so I'm assuming if they say German last names, they weren't in Germany. So basically our OP is getting England and Northwestern Europe. OP thinks it'll be through the mom's side. Dad doesn't really have it, so let's see at the dad. We see the breakdown, Germanic Europe. Dad has 3%. Dad has a lot of Spain, Indigenous Americas. Yeah, that all makes sense. So not much France, not much Ireland, but neither does our OP. And then when we look at the percentages here, yeah, we get 22% England and Northwestern Europe. So the big question I have here is, how much of the family tree do you actually have traced out? I see mention of great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents, but when you're talking about these DNA tests, it's basically giving you an image snapshot of back to about your third to fifth great grandparents. So if you have a family tree where it's not traced all the way up to all of your third great grandparents, then that means that you may have some surprising things popping in there. And if this person doesn't know a lot of their great great grandparents especially, then that could be coming from there. Now, with such a mixed ancestry, and especially knowing that the mom's side does come from Germany and Austria and those sorts of areas, well, there is a big connection between those areas and England and Northwestern Europe. And even though they may have them split up into different population groups, it's very difficult to be able to decipher between the DNA between them, because the people that make up the population group of France and Germany and the Low Countries, as well as then Northwestern Europe and, England, they all share a lot of ancestry. So they share a lot of different segments of DNA. So it's very hard for these companies to decipher what's what. They try their best, but that's why these are estimates. Now, these estimates seem to be from Ancestry, but if the OP were to test on 23andMe, one of the benefits they have is they have a chromosome browser for their ethnicity admixture, their estimates. So they basically will show you a visual of where that DNA is in your chromosome. So when you do that, it may be possible that you will find a lot bigger chunks of this England, Northwestern Europe, or however they define it on 23andMe, in only one side of each one of your chromosomes. And if that's the case, then yeah, it's probably mostly coming from one branch. So basically just another one of these Northwestern European mixtures where it's hard to decipher, and you have these parts where, even though your family tree says, all the family came from these different areas, you're getting these percentages that don't quite make as much sense as you would think. And honestly, I've been getting a lot of these questions connected with the England and Northwestern European and Ireland and Scotland and Norway and Denmark and all that stuff, and Germany. It's just like, it's so hard to decipher all that stuff. On to the next one. So for this question, they're saying that they took a Ancestry DNA test. They found a lot of biological family that they weren't connected with through DNA matching on Ancestry, and then reconnecting the maternal grandparents because the maternal grandfather and the maternal grandmother had lost contact for years. So the DNA test connected our poster with their family, as well as reconnecting their ancestors, which is pretty cool. Now, the results that are posted include the dad's results, the mom's results, and our poster's results. And they're basically just trying to learn more about their family history. So let's take a look. The dad is pretty much large majority African. Then we do have 12% Ireland, 7% England, Northwestern Europe, 6% Wales. So we're looking at, 25% European, and then we're looking at 75% African, which it's pretty much majority Western African. And we can see it's connected early Virginia African Americans, Carolinas, Maryland, and Virginia African Americans. So we're looking at African American ancestry. For the mom's results, a much bigger mix. One thing that I am noticing is that there's a little bit of indigenous Americas in here, so some Native American, although it does look like it would be very far back in the family tree. But it also looks like we're getting higher amounts of European and a bigger mix. So we have Spain 17%, Portugal 14%, so that's 31 right there. European Jewish is 3%. We have Northern African, Ivory Coast, and Ghana. And then when we look at additional communities, this is where we get the real picture. Puerto Rico, so that's making sense with all of it. We're getting the Iberian ancestry, we're getting the African ancestry, we're getting some of the Native American ancestry, we're even getting some Jewish ancestry. And then we're also seeing Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina African Americans, and Carolinas, Maryland, and Virginia African Americans. So basically, it looks like the father's side is just kind of, African American. His ancestors that were enslaved were brought into Virginia, the Carolinas, Maryland, and that seems to be the case for the majority of the family for the most part. Then for the mom's side, we're definitely getting that Puerto Rican connection, as well as some of that southern U.S. African American. Although with that side connecting to Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, Maryland, and Virginia. So a bit more spread out. And then for OP's results, we're getting a bigger mix because they're a mix of their parents who are already a big mix. Now, OP also makes another comment. They did know about the Puerto Rican ancestry. They know a good bit about their African American ancestry, which does connect to Georgia as well as North Carolina. And then they know their father's African American as well, his family having been in Virginia for as long as they can trace, which makes sense based on the DNA in the communities. Also knows that one of his great-grandparents was classified as mulatto, which does make sense. And for any of my international listeners who might not be familiar with that term, it's a term that was used to basically mean that somebody had both white and black ancestry, so both European and African ancestries. So honestly, I don't think there's a whole lot that I could necessarily add to this. They seem to be on a pretty good path, and the big thing would really be learning how to trace each of these different ancestral backgrounds. So for the Puerto Rican, you would want to learn about Puerto Rican genealogy. So what records are available, especially in the areas that your family's from. So let's see, they indicate for your family, Northwestern Puerto Rico and Aguadala, Isabela, San Sebastian. So you probably want to look in those areas. What records are available for those areas? And then, of course, the known areas in Puerto Rico that your family was living. So you want to find records and then see, can those records give you more information? And then you keep going down the rabbit hole. One place you can look is go to the Family Search Wiki. So let's go do that. So I'm even just going to do a search, Family Search Wiki, Puerto Rico. So we get this pull up and you'll see familysearch.org wiki. And you can do Puerto Rico genealogy. Now there's also the online records, but we'll look at that. And so this is a page that's talking about the genealogy of Puerto Rico. We're getting all the different municipalities. We're getting resources, different online records. And then you can click on specific municipalities. So we had Aguadala is one of them. So let's click on that. And then we see, okay, well, we have these different online records that are connected to Aguadala. We have a little bit of information. And then we even see Puerto Rico online genealogy, which I can actually go back. That's basically this. But then we can see Puerto Rico online genealogy records. So now this is going to be a list of all the records for Puerto Rico that are online. Now you will see some that have the dollar, which you see the website requires a paid subscription for full access. But this can be useful for people where, you know, there's a lot of websites to choose from to pay for access. And it can be hard to figure out which one you want. So when you look at these, maybe you find that, oh, wow, a lot of this stuff is on Find My Past. I want to have a Find My Past membership. Or maybe it's on Ancestry, so you want an Ancestry membership. For a lot of people who don't really do this even as like a full-time hobby, you know, just kind of do it in general interest, they're not going to want to pay tons of money to have memberships to, you know, 4 or 5 different websites where they're basically paying, you know, $1,000 a year for all of these different websites. Granted, you're not really going to be paying $1,000. I mean, it could get close to it depending on how many subscriptions you have, but this gives you a great idea of where to look. And we can see these records. Some of them are tracing back all the way to 1645. We have a whole lot of stuff ranging all in between. And we can see that some of them are even on Family Search. So if you go to Family Search, search for your family, see what you can find. Now, another route that you can also take, especially since your parents are willing to DNA test, and even more, you've connected with grandparents who maybe they'd like to DNA test, but basically get more of them to test. As well, have them do Y DNA testing, so the Y chromosome, and mitochondrial DNA testing. That could open up a lot of stuff, and it could tell you a lot of different interesting things. We have that 3% European Jewish hiding in your mom's ancestry. Well, if you just reconnected with your maternal grandfather and he takes a Y DNA test, and then all of a sudden that Y DNA test connects to a European Jewish lineage, well, then you know that if you trace up your mother's father's line all the way up, you're going to identify an ancestor who is Jewish. And then same thing for the mitochondrial, where anyone can take mitochondrial. Y DNA testing is only for males, but anyone can do mitochondrial DNA testing. But maybe you can find something very specific out about a maternal lineage because you do that test and you find out that, oh wow, my maternal lineage actually traces to a Native American haplogroup. And with so many different people being able to test, so if you have all of your grandparents do one of these, then that's all sorts of lines. You have 2 Y chromosome lines that you get tested through that. You have 4 different mitochondrial lines that get tested through that. And so then you're finding out very specific things about 6 different lines of your family. Well, there's a lot that you could find out of that. I honestly love Y chromosome testing and mitochondrial DNA testing. The unfortunate part of it, though, is it's only as strong as the amount of people in the database. It's just like these genetic matches. The more matches you have, the more you can do with it. But the problem with the Y chromosome testing and mitochondrial is it's not as popular, not as many people do it. A lot of people will push people away from doing it, saying, oh, you're not going to learn that much. But in all honesty, if everyone started doing it and there were more people doing it, there'd be more to learn because there's more people to connect with. So those are a couple of routes that you could take with this research. So here we have my grandfather's results. All the German and French is on his X chromosome. And let's see, it's just one. Oh, wait, no, we have two images. So let's go back to the first. So here we have French German. It's 1.8%. And then it's even connected specifically North Rhine, Westphalia, Germany, all of that. And then we're going to look at the DNA painting, which is on 23andMe. And we see, yeah, all of that French German is on the X chromosome. We do see some on chromosome 12. And I wouldn't be surprised if there might be a small segment here or there on chromosomes 1, 2, 3, or 4. But this is actually really significant and extremely helpful. First off, because it's on the X chromosome, this means that you know for sure that this French and German is coming through your grandfather's mother. Why is that? Because your grandfather didn't inherit any X chromosome DNA from his father. He only gets it from his mother. What he got from his father was his Y chromosome. Now, the other part of it is that we're looking at only about a 2% reading, but we have very specific communities being figured out here. Now, part of it could be that this person is Ashkenazi Jewish. A lot of Ashkenazi Jews lived in these German areas. And what this communities thing is coming up with is based mostly on where their matches are putting their ancestry. So they're getting a lot of DNA matches where they're saying that they have ancestors living in North Rhine, Westphalia, Germany. So there is a possibility that a lot of your Ashkenazi Jewish matches who have no French and German are listing this North Rhine, Westphalia, or something that would fall within that area. And so they're kind of picking up on that for some reason. But it could be that if they are only defining that for people that are also matching you who are French and German, well, then that gives you a good idea of where it might be. Now, at 2%, we are looking at fairly distant. So this is your grandfather. So you're going to be adding a couple generations on for the distance of you. So at 2%, you're looking at like a second or third great grandparent, maybe even a fourth great grandparent. And then if you're talking about your grandfather, well, then that means that it's your grandfather's second to fourth great grandparent, which then means that it would be your fourth to sixth great grandparents. Now, to give an idea of how far back that would be, for my age group, which is millennials basically, that would put the fourth to sixth great grandparent back to about beginning of the 1800s, back to maybe the early 1700s. So like I have a lot of fourth great grandparents who were born right around the turn of the 19th century. So late 1700s, early 1800s. And then when you're talking about my sixth great grandparents, a lot of them were born in the early 1700s. So it's going to be a far trace on the family tree. But because you do know that it's from your grandfather's mother's side, because it's on the X chromosome, then you're actually making it a little bit easier on yourself on where to look. And of course, even more than that, go look at X chromosome inheritance charts, and that will help you hone in even better because it rules out some other branches. Now, since you've tested on 23andMe, one thing you can do is go through the matches on 23andMe, and you can look at people that have places of birth for their ancestors. So basically limit it to people where their ancestors were born in Germany. And then when you click through, see if you can find anybody where they have not so much Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry, preferably none. And then you can know that it's very likely that those people are related to you through this French and German side. But one thing that I do want to say on all of this is that with it being only 1.8%, there is the possibility that this is not correct. It could be a false positive. But I think it is leaning on the side of more likely that it is possible that you will find a French-German ancestor somewhere in your grandfather's maternal ancestry. It's just going to take a lot of work to do it. Another thing to consider with doing more expansive DNA testing is looking into whole genome sequencing, where it's testing your entire genome. So basically it's looking at all of your autosomal DNA, it's looking at all of your Y chromosome DNA if you're a male, and then it's looking at all of your mitochondrial DNA for everybody. And you may get some more in-depth views than what you would get from even taking some of the family tree DNA, Y-DNA, and mitochondrial tests. So if you'd like to learn more about whole genome sequence kits, be sure to check out this video of mine right here. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give this a thumbs up. And if you'd like to subscribe, click right about here. It's completely free to do so. I'm the GeneaVlogger. See you in my next video.